Hello, everyone. How is everybody doing? We're very excited to have our next guest. This is the 8th edition of Knowledge Labs, and we have the wonderful Ted Leeming. Did I say that correctly?
Ted
Did I
Leeming.
butcher you? Ted Leeming. I apologize.
Spelled wrong. Butchered already.
Leeming. I butcher names all the time, so I do apologize about that. But we have the wonderful Ted Leeming, who is an environmental photographer. And so I'm personally actually very excited about this because we all travel around the world, and there might be so many things that we're doing that we don't even realize is having a negative impact. So we're going to really delve into that one. But before we go any further, how are you? How are you holding up, sir?
I'm very good. I'm just transitioning back from Italy back to Scotland, so I'm in a hotel room, and I hope the Wi-Fi holds up. We're in the Alps, so I hope it's going to be okay.
It's holding up fine. It looks like you're in a void. Yes. Well, for those people that have never heard of you and have no clue who you are and what you do, can you give us a quick spiel about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I started out in the late 80s as a photographer in London, just taking what I would call a jobbing photographer. I was doing magazine articles, I was shooting actors and models portfolios, basically anything to pay the rent. And I did that for 3 years. I was fortunate enough to be the photographer on an expedition down to Patagonia for 6 months. And I came back to London, and that was me.
Your world changed.
The world changed. Didn't want to be in the city anymore. And I'd always been an environmentalist. And so I headed back to my home in Cornwall, southwest England, and was asked if I wanted to volunteer in what was then a very fledgling renewable energy industry. And that volunteering turned into a job. In 1996, I moved to Scotland, started a little company out of a friend's spare bedroom.
As they all do.
As you do. And we effectively rode the wave for the next, I guess, 15 years of the development of renewables. And it's now, actually, I think we employ just under 500 people. We develop, own and operate plant for developers. We got 2. We're in Seattle and Saratoga Springs in the States. And we're based around Europe. So I did that and then I think, in effect, I'd admitted now I burnt out after a while and needed a break. So in 2004, I bought a camper van, lived in it for a year, and bought my first digital camera, a Canon 1DS, that they'd just come to the stage where they were sort of compatible with 35mm. And I said, I'm going to develop a landscape portfolio, which is the type of photography I love, and see if I could set up a landscape business, and really took it from there. I had a niche in the renewables market, so did a lot of work for the renewables industry, and I also developed a fine art limited edition print. I had a dozen galleries that represented me around the UK. I met my wife and we started developing what is now called ICM, impressionist type imagery. And we kind of got a bit of a name. There was William Neal doing it in Yosemite at the time, and a couple of other people, but very few. And so people started wanting to learn the technique. And so we started running workshops, and that got us very involved in running workshops. And I'll come on to that in a bit more detail through the slides.
Because that was interesting. I've obviously looked at your work, and you could definitely get that sense of the post-production that you do in terms of making it look like it's almost like a painting, right? It has a very fluid sort of tone to it, and I've seen that you've obviously traveled a tremendous amount. Is that how was that something that drew you to sort of making it that sort of otherworldly painting look-alike, or that was just something that you just stumbled upon and you just actually liked the way it looked and sort of took it from there?
It was stumbled upon, actually. It was I met my now wife, and she was out. She wasn't a photographer at all, and so when she picked up a digital camera, she had none of the preconceptions of how to take a photograph that I did.
Right.
So I was out shooting golden hour, tripod, all the
Rule of
usual
thirds
techniques, and she was just going, I'm having none of that. And she was creating blurs, and she was just outside the window one day, or outside one day, and the leaves were blowing, and she had a slow shutter, didn't really realize what slow shutter meant, but it created a nice effect. And then the next day she was out trying to emanate that when there was no wind. And so she waggled the branch to make the leaves move. And then the next phase was, well, if I slow the shutter and move the camera, and that was kind of how we got into it. So it was by accident. And then that led me into being really interested in, I did an art history module when I was at college, and was really interested in painters' techniques. And so I tried to better understand how artists saw the light through the camera, and that was my introduction into impressionist ICM work. So I do like, very much, a lot of our work is abstract. A whole area of it is based down the abstract route, although I'm increasingly using a lot of the abstraction that I learned in those days, but also bringing it back to more traditional roots as well in my later work in the environmental field.
Well, let's talk about that. You are an environmental photographer. For those that don't know really what that means, what's your definition? How would you describe an environmental photographer? What does that mean to you?
Okay.
I know we could be here for a while, but we'll just try and dissect it down. And I know you have some slides that you can potentially maybe use to help sort of describe that.
Well, I'll start with the slides because it gives my background. So if I try and share my screen here.
Perfect. Yep.
And see if we can bring up the slides. Go into presenter mode.
There we go. Fantastic. We can see it.
Is that with you?
Yep.
Okay.
It is.
So basically, we'll start with what I see as kind of the enemy, if you like, the bad boy, fossil fuels. And I guess way back in the late 80s, I did a juggle in Covent Garden for 24 hours for Greenpeace. So my green roots go.
Your hatred was deep and early.
It wasn't a hatred. It was really more I was very interested in the environment. I didn't know how to get involved with it myself, but it was really the climate discussion and the biodiversity discussion that fascinated me. And so I was exploring ways that I could get into it. And just to give everybody an idea, so 1990, I got involved in renewable energy, as I said. And 1990 was a time when across the globe, governments were starting to recognize climate change and the impacts that it could have. And they were starting to set targets that would avoid a climate emergency. So this is 31 years ago. We knew about it and we were setting the target so we wouldn't have a climate emergency. And I just got involved in renewables and thought, fantastic, this is how we deliver the solution, or part of how we deliver the solution. And I was really excited. And then, and this fact I only fully saw a couple of months ago, and it really struck me that since 1990, half of all the gases that contribute to climate change have been emitted into the atmosphere. So since everybody knew about it, and for me, this is devastating because it was we were so idealistic at the time back in 1990, and yet it doesn't appear as though we've got anywhere. In fact, we're teetering on an edge. I still think that we've got a way and we can come back from that edge, and we'll go into that. And so what I wanted to do with my work was as an environmental photographer, we've seen a lot of images of receding ice caps and glaciers and polar bears on icebergs, and for me that's really super important, but it's kind of disassociated for a lot of people with understanding what they can do to contribute. So it's this distant concept of climate change, and everybody's just kind of waiting for someone else to do something. So right. I guess what I want to do is try and help address that. But I don't know whether any of you have seen this particular graph, but anytime I get wonder if I'm really should be doing this, I look at this graph. It's from NASA. This is a graph that shows carbon dioxide in the atmosphere over the last 400,000 years. And it shows that we've had natural warming and cooling cycles in the atmosphere. But if you go to the right-hand side of the graph, you see that since 1950, the change has been exponential growth, way above anything that's ever happened before. So that's the reason that I'm doing what I'm doing. And over the next slides, I'll show you a little bit about where I've headed and the type of work that we're doing. Hopefully starting to proactively encourage people that there can be different ways to look at your own photography that maybe is more sustainable than how we're led to believe that we should be taking our photos. So maybe the first thing I should do is just show you this slide. This is because it is renewables. And the reason I put up this slide is really twofold, because I think if you're going to take good photos, you have to follow your passions. It's not just about being a photographer. I think that every one of us needs to find the area of photography that really suits us. And I think, you know, we run a lot of workshops, have done, and I think there's quite a lot of people on those workshops that don't truly understand where they wish to be as a photographer. And that's one of the things we try and help them with. Trying to find the genre that's right for them and the type of work. This very much was the sort of thing that renewables and climate emergency that fascinated me. But it also, the other message that I wanted to get out with this image was that actually nothing comes for free. If we all use, we all buy, we all consume, every single thing that we buy, consume, use comes at a price, and energy is one of those things that come at a price, and we all have to choose. Do we want our electricity come from, you've got three choices basically: fossil fuels, nuclear, or renewables. And so the first thing, if I was to say to everybody, if you want to make your photography practice, I'm guessing 90% of the people, 95% of the people who will be listening will be in a house somewhere, using electricity, probably shooting on digital. And the single biggest thing that every single one of us can do is to actually change our electricity supplier to one that is guaranteed to be supplying you with renewable electricity. That, very simply, will reduce your carbon footprint bigger than almost anything that you can do. So it takes 15 minutes to do. You can go on Google, do a search, and you will find a guaranteed renewable electricity supplier. And very simple. And the same thing with respect to your banking, your savings, and if you have a pension, if you're lucky enough to have a pension, you can actually go and look at what banks you're using and who are they funding as part of their bigger drivers. And if they're not sustainable, it's very easy to change your bank, change where your savings are, to ensure that, or your pension, to ensure it's in a sustainable fund and banks that aren't damaging the planet. So they're two of the things that literally you could do in an evening, sat at home at your computer, and it would probably reduce your carbon footprint effectively very significantly. And it also means the more of us that do it, the more the banks will change, the more the utilities will change, and the quicker that end to reliance on fossils will come. Second image I actually put up because, and it's a very tired image, because I think in the last, or about 10 years ago, pretty much every other photographer went to this beach.
They still do. They still do.
Oh yeah.
I was there. I was there 2 months ago.
When I first went to this beach, you'd maybe be sharing it with 2 or 3 other people.
Exactly.
How many did you have when you were there, Andrei?
Well, I've been to Iceland. Iceland's my favorite country in the world. I've been there 12 times. So I remember, which is something I wanted to ask you later, because I know that you shot in Iceland quite a bit. When I first started going to Iceland, which was, goodness me, 15 years ago, there were no tour buses. You would just literally walk up to the waterfalls. There wasn't even a parking lot. It was just more of a dirt road that you just happened to park your car on the side and then just walk to them. And now it's completely changed. So I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad you're showing this image, because I think Iceland was one of those countries where they are very energy forward in terms of their renewables, because they have so much geothermal. So they're definitely going in the right direction. However, at the same time, I feel ever since even just last 2 months ago that I went there, the tourism is just exponentially grown so much that it's having a real damage on the environment, whether it's trash, whether it's just pressure on the existing resources that they have, whether it's just the roads, whatever that may be. I kind of worry about where they're going. So I did want to pick your brain about Iceland for sure.
This, I think you might have written this slide, because it's actually called the Diamond Beach.
Yep.
And when I took this picture, this is the title that I gave it. And just taking up your point on, I don't know whether you saw these slides before, but
I did.
This
actually,
is numbers in Iceland. And if you look at the bottom left of the graph here, 1950, you've got, now remember, 1950 was the same date on that previous slide, where we saw the exponential growth in CO2. 1950, 4,383 people went to Iceland. In insane. 2018, 2.34 million people went to Iceland. And so that is 6,400 people every day arriving and leaving, every single one of them arriving by plane or by cruise ship. Very
few by cruise ship though. It's mostly plane.
Mostly plane. So,
and that airport just can't handle it. That's the other issue. It really.
Absolutely. It was, so it's that growth is, and you can look at anything else. This graph really strangely, and the first time I saw this graph was actually, it doesn't matter whether you like Dan Brown novels or not, but in one of his novels, he shows a similar graph, and you can apply this graph to population, to waste, to deforestation, to energy consumption, to any number of different parameters, and the exponential growth is exactly the same. It's so similar, it's scary. So basically, the other thing that happened in 2019, I don't know whether you knew about this, but it was a plaque went up on a remote mountainside in Iceland, which was the death of their first glacier. And
they put it right on the top
of it. And I was so struck by that, I actually renamed this photo. And it's amazing how when you actually look at a photo and how you name it, and I do spend a lot of time on naming now of images, because I think it sometimes adds to the message that you're trying to get across. In memory of that glacier, this particular image changed, and I think it does change the way that you look at an image instead of a sort of iconic scene or whatever. I'm not saying it's a good or bad photo, but turn it to Time to Die and you start seeing the melting glaciers, etc. And so from my perspective, if I was to try and advise anybody, the other biggest thing that you can do to reduce your carbon footprint is to minimize the amount you fly. It's as simple as that. There's no bigger carbon footprint on the planet. Flying comes first, cars come second, and so those, and then your heat, light, energy use is the third biggest one, with eating meat being number 4. So it's quite a simple equation, but I do recognize that, you know, we've actually given up. In 2018, we took a decision. We realized what these workshops were doing. We were also going to the Faroes, and I've already said we were planning to expand it to a global business. It was very successful, and there's a lot of people doing, you know, very well out of photography workshops, but we just couldn't justify it anymore, and we decided we had to change. And offsetting was effectively greenwashing us, encouraging people through our images, posting them on social media to come. More people come to Iceland, as you've seen by the figures, and so we stopped flying, we stopped doing the workshops, and we gave ourselves 2 years to redesign our business, and set a new vision, a new business plan as to how we were going to run our business, and this really takes us to what we then did to, so the new vision was that we would go on a journey towards zero carbon footprint for ourselves. We would look with everything we do to help raise awareness through projects and through speaking, raise awareness with respect to climate change, and also undertake personal projects that allowed us to express in different ways the feelings that we had, and hopefully encourage other people to go down a different, or see that there are other ways of taking forward your photography practice. So.
And I would think as well, even in that planning stage, I think what probably took so long was doing the research to try and align yourselves with the right operators, with the right hotels, the right way of really doing your vision of your workshop, but doing it in an environmentally friendly way, which probably in certain places is quite tough to do because they're just not developed enough. They don't have that infrastructure. The government has not helped them provide that for them. So I'm sure you probably had a lot of places that you wanted to go to, which are probably fantastic to photograph, but you ethically and morally probably wouldn't be able to do because it couldn't accommodate your vision.
We've unless it's in local to our home. So if we're in the UK and if a photography club, for example, asked us to run a workshop where they didn't have to fly, we would still run a workshop there. In Italy, we would still run a workshop there, where for relatively local people, but we wouldn't be running any air-based photography workshops. What we do now is run online workshops, exploring creativity in people's practice, and different ways, alternative. My wife is very, Morag is very into alternative processes, so anthrotypes and cyanotypes, looking at, we do a lot of work with forestry and treescapes as a natural carbon sequestration, and she uses soil chromatography as another form of expression. So we're actually branching out from the normal photographic techniques, and part of that creativity is what we're trying to teach people. And if we do run workshops, they'll generally be single venue retreats, rather than where we can actually explore everything very close to that base, rather than a venue based, you know, get on a bus, go to a venue, spend 2 hours there, get on the bus to the next venue. We'd stay in one place for a whole week or month or whatever it is. So
because it is amazing to, I mean, that concept while a lot of other workshops do exactly that, where they'll go to Italy and, like you said, they'll get on a bus to go to Venice, and then from Venice there's somewhere to go close, you know, you can go to Turin and then whatever else. So it's an incredible amount that you can photograph and hone your technique within 500-meter radius. You can work on your macro, you can work on your wides, you can, and it depends. In some ways that kind of hones your skills even more, because there's just so much more to do, given what lens you're using, given what camera you're using, what's your technique. Are you doing long exposure? Are you doing short? Is it you doing night photography? It doesn't have to be that kind of traditional workshop that we are accustomed to.
Absolutely. And if I just click on 2 slides here, there's so many different ways that you can get inspiration for those sorts of changes of becoming more local. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but as we were transitioning our business, we started reading around areas that excited us. And so I went back to my academics, and I was a geography student and an anthropologist. And so I started thinking, well, could I bring that back into my photography instead of pure landscape? So I started researching psychogeography and countertourism, any number of things, and then books around these subjects and nature-based photography very much more. And this has been recorded, I believe, by f-stop. So
yes.
You don't need to try and write all these down quickly, guys. You do a screenshot quick, and if you wish. But all of these things are very much ways that you can just do research in a different way, rather than just looking at photography books and the work of photographers. Actually explore the work of scientists, of writers in this field, because they bring a whole different angle to the arts world, I think, that photographers can learn so much from.
Yeah, agreed.
So I'm going to, this is actually, I'm going to take you to, this was actually, instead of just going out and visiting venues, taking photos, this was our first concept-based, purely environmental piece of work. And this is based at our house in Scotland. And basically we were lucky enough to find a plot of land. It's very remote. That's one of the only houses you can see. We've got a view of 35 miles. All around. It's on a hillside, and we decided to build a zero energy house and a natural house. So all the super insulated, triple glazing, all sheep's wool insulation. We've got a wind turbine on the hill that provides all the electricity. And I thought, I wonder if we could do a photography project around a zero carbon theme as well. And what we came up with was, why don't we take every single photo from the same location? And this was the patio, effectively outside the kitchen door, and this is a small portion of the view. So over the next 5 years, we took this theme forward. But as you can see from this shot, it's a lovely view, but it's not a beautiful image. So it was all about learning to slow down and really explore light and better understand light and season. This is exactly the same photo as you just saw. If I go back to it and you look in the bottom left, there's the tree. And you can just see a telegraph pole in the middle above the Z. And if I transition to the other shot, so this is the same image, and this is what photography ultimately is all about, is waiting for the light. This is, again, single image. There's no filtration on this whatsoever. It's about two minutes in Photoshop. We're very much field photographers. We're not about post-production, but it's a great lesson in slowing down and knowing your subject matter really well. And if you wish to, you can do this anywhere. It can be in a city, in a local park. And if you go back to the same venue time and time again, and sometimes don't take out your camera, just sit down, close your eyes and listen, sight, sound, smell, it's use all the senses to understand the environment around you. And that's when you really start learning about what's in your garden. And this is another one. This is actually this year. It was, this started in May And this was a pure unconscious, a different subject I was doing. I don't know whether you know No Mow May. Andrei, have you heard of No Mow May? It's become quite a big thing in Europe, where you basically don't mow your lawn. I think you'll be thrown out of the United States if
you would.
But basically, the concept is that there's almost zero biodiversity in a mown lawn that's covered in Roundup and pesticides, etc. They look absolutely beautiful visually, but for nature and biodiversity, they're very, very poor. And so this charity is basically encouraging everybody to go out and not mow their lawn for a month. So I started doing that, and my wife said I was being lazy. It was a great idea, but I actually then started looking more closely at that lawn and what came up amongst all the grasses, and it was utterly phenomenal what you started to see. So I put on the persona of an ant and how the ant sees the world, and really got down with a macro lens and crawling through the grass. And I extended it to the fields around us, the hay meadows and the road verges, and did a whole series, which I call the pollen makers, because everybody hears about the bees and how do we save the bees? And it's like, well, as individuals, we can't save the bees, but what we can do is actually just create a pollen-friendly garden with a bit more biodiversity, thinking about our gardens not just as visual treats for humans, but as edible gardens for insects and the bee world. And so this is another, it's very, very simple to do, which, I mean, there's a lot of people that take photos of plants and just visually, but if you start exploring it from a nature-based perspective, the way that you'll look at those plants is very different, and maybe the plants that you'll grow are very different. And actually what it will do is, when you start seeing how incredible and diverse that world is, you might actually stop using some of these pesticides and herbicides that are decimating the environment. I don't know whether you know, but 50% of all the species on the planet have lost 80% of their range due to man's activities in industrial agriculture and by using pesticides and herbicides and the techniques and removing those wild areas. So we can all play a big part, and it looks wonderful as well. So
yeah.
So the other type of project, those were very much around the home. The next project is a completely different sort of photography that I've started doing, which a month of each year, I do what is called an immersion into the landscape. And here it's actually the immersion itself is the project. So in 2018, I did a 440-kilometer hike along. It's called the Alta Via de Monte Liguria. It's a ridgeline walk in the Maritime Alps in northern Italy, and it was. I didn't have any preconceived ideas of what I wanted to shoot while I was doing that journey. I was really just responding to what I saw as I came along, and it was strange because you can shoot anything you like, but I did find that I naturally was drawn towards certain subject matter that I liked, and that felt close to the attributes that I have. And so I'd certainly encourage everybody to just really understand what means a lot to you and go out and shoot that sort of work as well. But the idea of this is that it's a very much a slow, low impact form of photography. I'm walking. My wife drove me to the start and picked me up from the finish. So there's no air travel required. And it was one of the most incredible experiences, not just photographically, but from a personal perspective as well. Hardly saw anybody for a month as I walked that route. And I guess the other point that I wanted to make, which is something we can all start thinking about more, is I was only able, I'm carrying everything. I've got my house on my back, my kitchen, my food, and my camera kit. I can no longer carry a big pack. I've even got to carry a solar panel to charge my charge my batteries, and if we don't get enough sun, I can't take any photos. So I've got a battery pack as well. But it meant I could only take a single camera, and I was lent
and one lens.
And one lens, a short zoom.
Yeah.
Panasonic loaned me a camera a new camera to market, so they asked me to test it for them. It was a Lumix Micro Four Thirds. I was horrified at the thought of using a Micro Four Thirds. But this image I've blown up to 1.8 meters by 1.5 meters, which is 70 inches by about 60 inches. In US terms. I mean, and the quality was phenomenal. Andrei, I know you shoot phase one, so
it's okay.
I don't think I'm going to persuade you to go and buy a Micro Four Thirds tomorrow.
I'm okay with my medium format. but again, like I've said so many times, the gear that you have and what you shoot, it really depends on what you're trying to achieve and where are these images going to live. You know, sometimes your iPhone is your best camera. If you're walking around, if that's the only camera I have, that is the best camera that I have. If I'm in a controlled environment in a studio, or I know exactly what I want to be shooting and I know exactly the lens that I need, you know, then I'll be on my phase. But
sure,
you don't have to shoot medium format. It would have been tough given the weight of the face to be able to do a 500-mile hike, and your back would have been broken. So the right tool for the job, you know, depending on what you're trying to do.
I think that's true, but also I guess the message that I'm trying to get out to people is, unless you are shooting and need to have that ultimate level of quality that you're shooting, you know, I don't know whether it's for billboards or what you're doing it, but when we run workshops, I've only ever met one photographer on all the workshops that we run that has ever printed anything bigger than 1.8 meters. And that being the case, you don't need to keep buying the next generation of a camera because someone tells you to buy it. If you've got
I agree with that.
Sensor size is not the be all and end all, and keeping buying new equipment doesn't make you a better photographer.
Could not agree more. I definitely couldn't agree more. I think the only thing that's an advantage with the newer cameras is just the new technology that inevitably is going to be included into them. You know, built-in focus stacking, much better noise reduction directly from the camera itself, better color grading, because it's a higher bit color bit. So that to me, I mean, I shoot medium format because I love there's a certain feel to the file itself. It's incredibly clean. It has a certain feel that no 35mm or film can really get close to. And I'm obsessed with the quality of the file. That to me is the biggest thing, and how much I can play with it without destroying it. It's a non-destructive, just because of the size of it and the resolution. But beside the point, we're not here to talk about phase one, I guess, and the different files. For this kind of trip, it made sense for you to have a good, high quality, small, portable camera with one lens. And also, it's interesting that you chose one lens, because I always have this internal battle. I'm sure a lot of other photographers do. Is I know I'm going to a place. I know that I need a wide because I'm in a landscape. But I want to get a close up. I want to get a macro. I want to get tight on something. I'm going to have to bring 3 or 4 lenses. It's incredible what it will do to you creatively to just decide on one lens only. That's the only thing you take. That, in my opinion, will make you a better photographer, because it completely locks you in terms of your perception of what you can see given what the lens can do. So that's I would highly recommend that for everyone, to just bring one camera, one lens. That's it on a trip.
Totally agree. I used a 55mm for about 18 months, and it was, I think, 95% of all the images I took, and it was the best thing I ever did as a photographer, to learn how to take.
And that's light. The 55 mil is light. Was that a Panasonic one? Or?
No, I shoot Sony now. So it was the Zeiss 55. Amazing. I now only carry 3 lenses.
What is that? A 1.8 or something ridiculous?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. It's super sharp.
I have an 18 mil and I have a 100 mil macro, the Sony 100 mil macro. But the other thing I do, so I've got the Mark IV. So I've got 60 megapixels to play with, but I set one of the custom buttons so I can reduce the pixel count. So it's effectively an APS-C sensor. And I can take an 18 mil to about a 28 mil, 25, 28 mil. The 55 mil becomes a 75 mil. 100 mil comes a 170 mil, and I've still got 36 megapixels to play with.
You'll lose resolution, but you'll definitely change your perspective of what the lens can do. Yeah,
exactly. It just gives you a bigger range.
Right.
So
because again, it depends on where that file is going to live. Maybe there are times when you need a 60 megapixel because you know you're going to be blowing it big and resolution is important. Other times, it's just going to go on my website, which we all know the internet will absolutely destroy your files. So
sure,
it's all relative in terms of what you want to do with it.
Absolutely. So I'll just move on very quickly. I know we haven't got much time left. So this is another immersion that I did. This was 2019, and this was a cycle. And I decided to cycle the length of the Danube from sea to source. So I went uphill. And Andrei, I know that's your home country on the right there.
Yes, it is.
And your sworn enemy on the left.
Nemesis.
So we got Romania on the right here. We've got Bulgaria on the left, and I'm actually stood on the peace bridge between the two countries. And this was as I say, it was about a 3,000 kilometer cycle over the space of a month. But immersed within the landscape, moving very slowly, and just responding again to what I saw. I had no agenda whatsoever, other than an end date when I had to get on a train from Zurich in Germany. I had no hotels booked, and it just allowed a huge amount of freedom to experience everything that goes around you, to get lost, and actually to fail. I wasn't doing it for anybody. The trip itself was the project, and any photography I got out of it was purely incidental. It ended up, I did shoot quite a lot of photography when I was there. And a number of themes again came out of the body of work, which I tend to call threads, which when I get back in the studio, I pull together into different themes based around the river, cultures. There was this is actually shows the turbidity in the water here, and the tree that's floating down. There was a huge weather event up in the Alps, 2,000 kilometers away, together with the snow melt, and it created a massive flood downstream. All the tour boats had to stop because they couldn't get under the bridges, and which was quite weird in itself. It was the 100-year event, if you like, and 9 months earlier my mum was going on a cruise down the Danube and couldn't go because of drought, and the water levels were so low. So changing worlds. But it's really to show different ways of travel to people. This again, this was actually the last one where I actually flew from end to end, and now I because it was almost done before our decision was made that I was going to do this to stop flying. So but now any trips that I do, I look to get to and from by public transport, or it's on my e-bike, or by cycling straight out of the house. And this is kind of last but one. This was purely for my wife's working on with a lady in the States and a lady in Finland, and they've set up an ICM membership. So part of our move towards zero carbon is to, instead of doing the workshops, exotic workshops, actually set up an online membership, global. They've actually never met. So one lives in the States, one lives in Finland, and Mog and I live in Scotland and Italy. And they've never met, set up a business and running ICM photography. It's a series of, they do tutorials, they do portfolio reviews, there's discussions, coffee mornings, and different people interact with the forum in a different way. And this is something that I think has been enabled by COVID, has been fantastic for bringing together global communities with similar interests. And I think this is going to be a huge forum for growth in the future. I think, and it was quite exciting because the lady in the States also runs an ICM set up in COVID, ICM Photography Magazine, and they're doing an environmental issue for COP26, the climate conference that's coming to Glasgow, which is our nearest city where we live in Scotland. She asked me to do an article for it. So I've got to shoot ICM for the article. And this actual piece is I called it Blinded by the Light. And the inspiration was that my wife brought home a bird in the summer. It had fallen out the nest and it landed in the road, and she brought it home. And I like birds, but I'm not big into birds. I'm not a twitcher. And I just sort of looked at it and went, what am I supposed to do with that? And she just went, well, feed it. and Bird, as we ended up calling it, really inspirational name. He was only with us for about 3 weeks before he either flew off or nature took him. But it totally changed my view of how to look at the avian species, in the same way that the pollen makers changed the way I looked at plants. Bird changed the way I looked at birds. And so I started researching a little bit more about birds, and I realized, in fact, became to realize that somewhere between 300 million and a billion birds are killed every year hitting buildings. And a vast proportion of them hit buildings because we leave the lights on at night. And also, not only that, but as we increase the size of our cities increases, and the light pollution from that not only confuses the 24-hour rhythms of the birds, but it also confuses their ability to migrate down their traditional paths. And not only the birds, but also the insects upon which many of them feed. So I was trying to, I thought that would be a great project for biodiversity, for climate change, because there's an energy element. And so very quickly, it was a lovely project because I had to complete it very quickly. And I went down to the local towns and used this type of imagery. So it's a very different project from the previous in the way that I'm shooting and techniques I'm using. But it was trying to express the confusion of the birds in light.
And this is obviously just incredibly slow. You're just basically dragging the shutter. What did you use to make the light trails?
So this is
lights?
This is the city lights, and it's actually flipped upside down because the shadow there looks rather like a hill, but it's actually then the reflections in the water, which I turned into the sky effectively. And the shutter speed was about a quarter of a second. It wasn't particularly slow, so I'm moving the lens quite quickly. A single exposure, but it's all the street lights and the lights of the boats that were in the harbour that are creating the trails. It's certainly not a pretty picture. It's a picture that's trying to tell a story. I think it's great.
I actually really like that. I'm drawn to colors. So for me, anything that has color and has either a singular line of continuity or just complete mayhem, I'm drawn to both extremes of that. So I think I actually really like this. I think it was great.
I think there's a whole range of work that's coming out of ICM now. It's a really exciting area. It's not everybody's taste. Some people love it. It's a real Marmite area. But some of the work that we're seeing now that folk are just learning from each other. And because people are collaborating in this membership that Mog's working with, they're talking together, they're forming remote relationships with other photographers and working together to explore a theme, both coming at it from different angles, and by doing so, people are producing whole new bodies of work that are light years away from the work that was being produced even literally 2 years ago. It's a really exciting to see the trend evolve and the speed with which it's evolving.
Yeah.
So anyway, a pretty simple message here for everybody. Turn off your lights if you're not in the room. My dad and my granddad used to moan at me about leaving the lights on when we were out, and it was you just did it in our house. And also standbys in the UK, that we have to have an entire power station just to keep on all those standby lights that we don't turn off. The computer we just leave on, the TV set, the hi-fi. It's an entire power station in the UK just to keep them running. So it's not just about saving money and doing good for yourself, but the light pollution that we're creating is such a big issue. I'd also recommend you write to your local authority and ask them to do the same, because it's such an easy thing that everybody can do to do a huge amount of good for the avian species, migratory species. So I'm going to come to, this is my final thing, and this is really about getting creative and just going out and just having fun. We've got, as I just mentioned, COP coming to Glasgow in just over 2 weeks' time. It's a bit of a circus. The international community flies from all over the globe to talk about how they can save energy. And I thought, I've got to do something. I've got to go there and have a presence, however small a voice it might be. And I tried to think of what I could do, and I came up with the COP Most Wanted playing cards. I don't know whether if you remember in the Iraq War.
They had the most wanted people on their cards. Yeah,
that's it. And this is kind of the most significant issues relating to climate emergency. And I'm not going to go through them all, but you can see various cards appearing, and I've done a whole deck of cards. And the idea is that we're going to go and install them throughout Glasgow, the cities of the UK. I've got friends all around the UK. The furthest afield, we've got someone in Wellington, New Zealand, who's going to be out there during COP installing cards just to try and raise awareness of issues around climate change. So if anybody does fancy having a bit of doing a bit of mischief in during COP, just send us an email and I'll send you a pack of cards and you can go and install. We're doing sort of A7 and A5, and it's kind of putting it on notice boards. If you're at a bus shelter waiting for a bus, that you look over and it just makes you think for 30 seconds while you're stood there waiting, and maybe that raises awareness, but also provides a solution to a problem that's raised there. You know, the one about beef burgers, 660 gallons of water for a beef burger just gives you an idea of the industrial agriculture, and that's only one of the impacts that comes from eating meat. And so it's the three messages on these three cards are activism. And that doesn't mean to say you have to go out and join a protest march. You can join a community. I don't know, there's a lot of allotments and community gardens growing up in the UK. now, and they're becoming really popular. It means that people are buying local stuff. They're growing the food, putting it into a local community shop and selling it for the same price as you can buy it at Walmart or Tesco's or in the UK. Eating less meat. And then the other one is just awareness that there's people everywhere selling you stuff and trying to sell you be it a view, a camera, a lens, something, and just don't take their word for it, basically.
Yeah, I think, and I've heard this from so many people that I've spoken to about climate change that are individuals, they feel very helpless because I don't know, you mentioned about some of the things that we can all do individually, but they still feel like they're so, I'm just such a tiny pawn in this gigantic sort of wheel that's going on. It really needs to come down from the governments themselves, cut down the greed, really bring change on a legislative basis that's going to help. To your point about not traveling by plane, absolutely we shouldn't do that. Or if we do continue, really put pressure on some of these companies to make the planes themselves be more environmentally friendly. It can be done. I fear how long it's going to take for that to happen, which is, again, we're racing against time.
Sure.
But even if we're all going to be, I think people are worried about the concept of, if we're all starting to get into electric cars or e-bikes and we're just going to be biking, there still needs to be that infrastructure there to support that. Because if millions of people are coming off planes and going into bikes and electric cars, I fear if that's not done properly and well thought out, I fear what that may have a really negative impact on everything else. How is the electric batteries going to be replaced, and how are they going to get destroyed? Are they going to be done in an environmentally friendly way? If there's going to be bike parts everywhere from country to country, there's going to be restaurants, and that's going to have a carbon footprint. I think a lot of people feel like the government needs to step up more with the type of correct information and then actually take action on it. Since it's just such it's a tough thing for us to change when we don't quite feel that change ourselves yet, until it's going to be too late. I know here in the US, fires are exponentially increasing, happening more and more often. Look at all the storms that are currently happening. Those are definitely as a result of climate change. The governments themselves really need to make that change and step it up. And even as ourselves as photographers, I asked you beforehand, before we even came on, you consider yourself an environmental photographer. You're doing that for a message. You're doing that to try and bring more awareness to it. We need more people to be able to be aware of, when I'm traveling to a different country, what kind of impact am I really having, from the smallest thing to the largest thing. And I just think a lot more people need to have the right information. To your point about Facebook, what are they putting online that's just so deceptive in so many ways? It takes a whole village. And it does start from an individual basis. I could not agree more.
The reality is, it has to be all of the above. If we just
collectively,
if we just wait for government to do it and the corporations to do it, who are driven towards a growth model, in the UK, the CBI that represents industry just says, oh, we only want a small amount of growth. It's just 3% a year. Well, we're already
a gigantic impact on the environment.
We're already
3%.
Sustainable. That's doubling output in 24 years. If we just wait for them, then everybody is just pointing the responsibility at someone else. I think that we all have to take a level of responsibility. I mean, that's just the reality that we've come to now. I take your point on efficiency. I can still fly, and it's the plane operator's responsibility to make it more efficient. Planes are 8 times more efficient than they were in 1970. That hasn't made plane travel more environmentally friendly. That's
and we're flying more.
Meant that there's more flights, because it's just brought down the cost. More people get on planes. And there is, since the Industrial Revolution and steam-fired, locomotives going around. It made them more efficient, and more people then traveled. It didn't make it more environmentally friendly. So I think the efficiency thing, and you see it on this slide here, which is the scale of things you can do. Switching to a battery car is 50% more efficient than a diesel car. It's huge, and I think if we will always, I've just bought one literally this week. I'm on my first long journey on it. I will then be able to tell you with some authority how efficient they are, how practical they are. What I do know is, from the battery perspective, there's an 8-year warranty on them, 80% of the output that they're at now. So there is a longevity in there. And I know that battery technology is changing, so it isn't using lithium to the same amount. It will change over the next years. But if we just wait until everything's perfect, then it will be too late. And that's a for sure. So
the government needs to help subsidize as well with electric cars and hybrid cars. They're still very expensive to the regular consumer. That's one of the issues. I'm sure everyone would love to have an electric car. First of all, I don't think the grid can sustain that yet. That's another thing where the government needs to step in and help a Tesla or a GM or a Ford to really, and they're doing that massively in California, but I know that the rest of the country, speaking from the US perspective, I know that that's not happening to the degree that it really should be happening. They need to really increase that, reduce the cost of the cars themselves for the consumer, give them the incentive to buy, and then help in the infrastructure. Because without that infrastructure, it's going to be a very expensive car and people won't be able to go anywhere. So it's everything. You're absolutely right. Everything has to go hand in hand, starting from the individual all the way up to the top, and keep putting pressure on the top to trickle it down as best we can.
Absolutely. So that is essential. I mean, it is surprising. At the end of the day, we put these people in power. So if we actually say these are the things that matter, and we tell the politicians that that's what is really important to us, ultimately they will listen if enough of us say it, because otherwise they're not going to be in a job when it comes to the next election. So there is ultimately they are afraid of the people if enough of the people speak. Absolutely.
They're afraid of change for sure.
Yeah. Everybody's afraid of change. I think that is the biggest thing. And taking a step individually, proactively, to say, actually, I'm willing to take, and it will not be without consequence. I mean, to be sustainable, effectively, truly sustainable in the world, so your carbon footprint as an individual doesn't add something, you either have to not have a diesel car or not fly. That's the reality of to be truly sustainable. And so it's such a huge area that we have to address. I agree, it's very daunting, but we all have to take that first step and do a little bit to help, and that journey will be different depending on the fortunes of the individual. I'm lucky enough to, if I'm going to talk about this subject matter, then I have to understand it and be doing it myself, so I can talk about the good and the bad. And it isn't all good. It's about compromise. It's about reducing. It's about changing your mindset. But actually, the more I do it, the more I'm enjoying that journey and the positives that come out of it.
Couldn't agree more. Absolutely. All right. Was that the last? Just want to confirm. Was that the last slide on?
That was the last slide. I think. Yeah. That's it. So perfect. We can. There we go. Let's stop sharing.
There we go. Just want to double check. I'm trying to see if we have any questions. If anyone has any questions for Ted, please send them through. Personally, from just my perspective, how confident are you that we will be able to achieve this in a timely manner before end of destruction, which is inevitably going to happen if we don't make changes now?
Wow.
Do you
30 years
believe in
ago,
humanity, that we're collectively wanting to do this to really save our planet for not only ourselves, but for everyone else and all the species that live here?
I think 30 years ago, I was hugely optimistic. I'm probably ever more concerned now. I have to stay optimistic. You can't do anything other than stay optimistic. That there's got to be a way. And the only thing that I can do is just do my bit to hopefully give people some ideas as to how they might be part of that, be the change. Yeah, it is going to be tough though. I mean, I think US, UK, and the UN have all said that that COP26 isn't going to deliver the 1.5% that we really need, and the drive will be towards that. I find it incredible that they can't do it, given the information that they have, the science that is there. But I have to hope, therefore, increasingly that it comes from the people, and that we all stand up and make our voices heard, because I think that's what will bring the change.
I'm curious to get your take, because I'm sure you meet plenty of people that think this way. How do you deal with those that say global warming is a myth, it doesn't happen, it's not real, there's no science to prove it, all the everything like nonsense that goes along with that? How do you, first of all, stay calm? How do you then try and convince them that this is really truly happening? How do you handle someone that thinks that way?
Well, you can the first thing you can say is that equal to climate emergency is biodiversity, and even if you don't believe in climate change, you could believe in biodiversity, because if you address the biodiversity issue, then you will automatically be addressing the climate emergency as well. So you have to disbelieve both of those things if you're to be a true denier. I then go to the graph that I showed you, number one. If someone says it isn't happening and they look at that graph, I just would do what Greta Thunberg was asked, what she would say to Donald Trump. And she said absolutely nothing, because there's no point me talking to him. Yeah. I say my piece, and I'm not going to change him. But we have to change the people that are ready to listen.
Yeah, and that's probably the best way to. That's probably the best answer that you can do, because they're just going to say fake news. They're going to say those numbers are not real, and species that have become extinct under our watch because of directly because of us and our actions, they'll just say, well, that was natural cause, and there's a natural progression of life, and you can't get in the way of that. I've had this conversation with so many people, and you're just going around in circles, and it's just not
they'll find another argument and another reason, but you can just take them back to the science and say, are you saying that this graph that is produced by 97% of scientists now agree with the science, and you just have to say, okay, so you're saying 97% are incorrect, and that can be about biodiversity, it can be about climate change. I'm going to go with the 97% on this one, but it's every person's an individual. I think you're not going to ever change those 3%. You can please all of the people some of the time, some of the people all of the time.
That's true.
But of those 97% that know the science, recognize the science, and are concerned about the science, every single one of them can be proactively doing things to address the issue.
We had a question come in. How do you convince the governments and companies to reduce the amount of plastics that's sort of shoved upon us? And I think the one silver lining is that there has been that awareness brought up, and there has been small steps. I just don't know if they're big enough yet to have made that massive impact. So I think the conversation has been started, but it's definitely, I think it's been minimal impact really in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the drinking straws was huge in the media. you know, drinking straws is 0.03% of all plastics that are going into the oceans. It was it's a distraction, and potentially it was a well-managed distraction by certain entities, because it distracted away from the big issue. But you know, Coca-Cola is the single biggest plastics producer, and until you start addressing the big corporations' use of plastic, then it's not going to go away. The projections is that the amount of plastic in the sea is going to go up for another decade at least. In fact, I think one of your earlier speakers on Knowledge Labs was saying something very similar.
Yeah, the huge trash island that's being developed and constantly expanding in the Pacific, I believe. I think it's the Pacific.
You know, I have a, you know, here it is. I don't buy plastic bottles anymore. I have one of these. I fill it with water.
I'm the same way. I don't know where mine is. I have about 10 of these bottles, and they stay cold, and I reuse them constantly. I couldn't agree more.
I don't go into Starbucks and buy a paper mug. You know, it's you know, we can do things ourselves, but this is absolutely one that's got to come from government as well. The problem is that the lobby that's coming to government is pays them well.
We are an imperfect species, and greed is one of the worst qualities of humanity, which is just really holding so many things back as a result of that. But I hope that we can continue to do our part a lot more, and we need people like yourself through your work and your art and your message to just keep ringing the bell, because so many people can become very complacent and just sort of get lost and stuck in their daily lives because it's comfortable, and change is tough, and change is complicated, and we don't understand it, so it scares us. And that's we need to continue having that voice and that message coming through. So thank you for continuing that, and we're going to do our part as much as we can to promote this on all the channels. And no,
it's a great thing. And I would say, you know, the f-stop is a prime example of
exactly,
good, because they've produced a quality project. I mean, I don't know about you, Andrei, but we've got a variety of their gear that's been going for years and much longer than any other camera bag that I've owned.
Absolutely.
And that's about building quality, not building redundancy into stuff. And we can all buy quality products that will last us. They'll cost us a bit more at the beginning, but they'll last longer. So we need more companies like f-stop actually stepping up to the mark and delivering.
Well, because I feel like it's and that again comes from the top. It comes from the people that are in charge there that have taken that stance and have made that conscious decision that they're willing to forego a certain, you know, profit, really, if you think about it from a monetary perspective, and they're willing to forego that because it's a bigger cause at play. So the use of the materials that they have in their bags, the way that their factories are being run. I speak to Druid about this. I know you yourself have spoken to him plenty of times as well. It's a rare thing for a company of this size making that kind of product. It's we need more of that to do, and that's when the whole wave is going to sort of start hitting more and more. Hopefully more of them will come on board, but it's that initial step of, am I willing to forego that cash to make that difference? And that's the tough call that has to come from the top, and you know, initially to inspire then other people to do it.
The bizarre thing is, and I can't remember the founder's name of Patagonia, said every time that he made an
that's a great example
decision, he made more money. And so
Patagonia is a great example of that. I'm glad you brought that up.
They're a brilliant example. And he said that, you know, they even did an advert saying, don't buy this coat because it's bad for the environment. You know, keep with your old coat until it's completely worn out, and then we'll take it off you before we'll buy and recycle it.
And they pushed back on the government too when they were making some of the changes. Well, we're not going to get into the Trump era, but when the whole Trump era was doing and making all the stupid decisions about oil drilling and whatever else, they were the ones that really pushed hard. I think they even gave away some stuff for free, and it just the CFO of Patagonia is definitely someone that I look up to in terms of their stance. It's just great.
It's a brilliant vision. And if everybody took that vision, or even a small
percentage of it, exactly. It doesn't have to even be to that extent. It's just that, and then that inspiration will then inspire other people. So it's just it's getting that ball to just roll that little bit quicker every single time down the hill. So
absolutely.
So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Again, we need more people like you. So I'll continue following your work, and would love to collaborate on projects, because I definitely have the same thought process and vision that you do in terms of helping. So would love to stay in touch. And like I said, this is recorded live, so we're going to be promoting this on our channels and continuing the good fight.
Great. Well, thanks very much for having me. Thanks to F-Stop and Drew and the team. Brilliant.
Sounds great. All right, guys, we'll see you back in a few weeks' time for our next episode of Knowledge Labs. So tune in and keep an eye out for what's next.